Good afternoon to all our participants across Europe and beyond. I hope you're all well and your loved ones are healthy and safe. What a year it's been for everyone across the globe, and here's hoping for better days ahead. I'm Ali Madani, one of the project coordinators here at the City's Faith and Communities Forum. And on behalf of the CFCF and the OSCE, our partnering organization in the event, I'd like to warmly welcome you all to our conference here today, Intolerance and Hate in the Age of the Coronavirus. Can I please ask everyone to put their name and their title and city they're from on the chat? We will have time for a Q&A at the end. If you'd like to post any questions, please do so at the chat. Keep in mind that our presenters are across Europe today, so maybe English isn't their first language. So we thank them very much for joining us today. We do have a great lineup for you. In terms of this event, really the idea of the conference stemmed from the report published by the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, titled Human Dimension Commitments and State Responses to the COVID-19 Pandemic. This report is the accumulation of ODIHR's efforts to respond to human rights challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic throughout the OSCE. It aims to help OSCE participating states learn lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic in order to strengthen their institutions ahead of future challenges. Today, we're joined by the head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department in Warsaw, OSCE's own Kishan Manocha, who will introduce the report. Kishan, thank you very much for being here. How are you?
I'm very well, and it's a lovely sunny afternoon here in Warsaw. So it's lovely to be with everyone and to see you all and to be co-hosting this meeting with the City's Faith and Communities Forum, which is doing really very impressive work. So I'm very delighted to be here.
Can I just intervene just to say Lord Mayor is online, Ali, so you should know.
So Kishan, before you introduce the report to everyone, is it okay if we introduce our guest of honor who we're very thankful that she was able to join us. She's very, very busy and needs to leave early. And to introduce her is CFCF, one of the senior members of the CFCF and possibly one of the best interfaith practitioners across the continent and a dear friend of mine, Mr. Adrian Criscia, to introduce the Lord Mayor of Dublin. Adrian.
Well, thank you, Ali. I'm not sure I deserve that that commendation. I'll take it nonetheless. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dublin's first citizen, Lord Mayor Hazel Chew. Hazel was elected the 352nd Lord Mayor of Dublin at the annual meeting of Dublin City Council in June 2020. And she is the 9th woman to hold the office as the Lord Mayor of Dublin. Hazel was born and raised in Dublin, so she's a true Dub, as we say around here. She became involved in politics in 2014, and in 2019 she became the first Green Party councillor to be elected in the local elections for the ward of Pembroke, where she topped the poll with over 4,000 preference votes. And in the same year, she was elected chair of the party. Hazel studied politics and history at UCD and trained to be a barrister at King's Inn. While studying, she worked as a fundraising consultant for nonprofits and as a production manager for music festivals. After being called to the bar in 2017, she worked in Sydney, Hong Kong, Gulen, and when she came back home, she was offered a fellowship by UCD Smurfit School and worked in New York for Brodeur. Hazel, in her spare time, lends her voice to promoting diversity and equality. Very grateful to have her here, and she's a regular media contributor. Her first loves are her daughter, running election campaigns, surfing and cooking. Since she was a teenager, she worked in her mother's restaurant in every position, from dishwasher to waitress to sous chef. So without further ado, we invite Hazel to take the floor.
Thanks, Adrian. I think the introduction that the chair gave you was pretty accurate, to be honest with you. I've only known you for about 2 months, and all that he said about you is pretty spot on. I'm delighted to be here today to just do a short chat. Actually, there is no presentation. I think I was, when Adrian told me about this, I really wanted to come on, and I really wanted to come on to say thank you to everyone for their hard work, and also say thank you to the fact that there's forums and conferences like these that talk about the need for tolerance and the need of how hate in the age of the coronavirus is thriving. And these discussion topics are things we need to constantly talk about to try to move things forward and try to move the dial of where the overall discourse in the world is. I myself would have been, as Adrian said, coming from a political background, but I am the child of a first generation immigrant to the country. And when my mum and dad first arrived, I've noticed with them, they gravitate to each other because you gravitate to things that are home, missing home. So they met each other of discrimination through different times, sporadic, but not as often as these days. But what I took from their time here and how when they were first over here is that we don't have good integration practices when it comes to Dublin and some other cities around the world. And that in itself leads to an element of intolerance by people, because when you have communities that don't integrate, you have division and separation. And what you will have is people not respecting each other's commonalities and celebrating their diversity. So one of the first things I'm doing here in Dublin is building an integration plan. We always had one within our corporate plan, but there was always a strategy that sat on a shelf gathering dust. There were certain things that were rolled out and Adrian and the Interfaith Forum and other people had built into it, but it was never something that we found was working and breathable. Because to me, I think tolerance and how to fight hate comes from the grassroots upwards, comes from your community level. And this is why I would always hark back to when my parents arrived and think that if you don't have proper integration at that time, throughout history, if you don't have a plan and strategy, it gets worse. And this is why, again, my top priority is to build one. And that is what I'll be doing in the next couple of weeks. And what I have done when looking at how to build a fit for purpose integration and anti-discrimination strategy for the city is that people don't seem to like admitting that there's intolerance. I think that's the very first step when it comes to hate in the current state of where we are at. I think coronavirus have brought out a lot of people's tensions and what they would have normally hidden away and not say. And and a lot of people think, well, and there's two ways to look at this. In one way, you see the growing tensions and discrimination and go, okay, it's getting worse. But on the other side of the coin is a lot of this is hidden and it's always been there. So now that it's out, how do we address it? How do we tackle it? And Corona has been this awful state of affairs and costs of lives. And there's a lot of mourning and loss that I loathe to use the word opportunity, but there is an opportunity across the board to address a lot of elements of what certain societies and cities are missing. Be it infrastructure for more sustainable travel, be it a proper hate crime legislation to address what is very much creeping out from under the floorboards. And this is why, as the chairperson of a party that's in coalition government, what we have very much put in black and white in our negotiation for a program for government is that there needs to be hate crime legislation, but there needs to be fit for purpose hate crime legislation, because coming from a legal side, I know the arguments of both sides. I know the arguments of you are restraining one's freedom and you are restraining one's speech and censorship, but our freedoms aren't limitless. They don't come to everyone without a cost. And this is why it's really important to build a fit for purpose hate crime legislation that would work, so that your distractors can't come at you and say, oh, well, listen, this is what we told you about. This is exactly why we don't think hate crime legislation works. There are countries, plenty of countries that will work, and we need to model it on that. We have a incitement Hatred Act, a 1989 Act that isn't currently working, and this is why it is easy as it sounds. It's important because I'm white, but I think my internet is unstable according to my laptop, but she looks like me, and she will inevitably look into the mirror one day, and either two things will happen. She will say, I love being who I am. I love that the color of my skin, the way I look. Or she could look in the mirror and feel the same thought I and a lot of children that has suffered discrimination feels, which is, I wish I was a different color, or I wish I was a different person. And there is a proclamation of independence outside my office. It's a signed charter by our forefathers that when they first proclaimed independence, there's a line in it that says we should cherish all our children equally in this state. And that is what we have to fight for time and time again. And this is why forums like this to discuss intolerance, to discuss how we build on how we move away from hate, from discourse, important. And it's why the American triumphs in the recent week is really important as well. We're at a precipice now. We're pushing the conversation in a better direction, right? But there are plenty of people on the other side that thinks they're right as well. And that comes down to a point of mine that I always think, maybe it's just the diplomat in me, but there has to be an even ground at some stage. There is an element of what is right, but then there is also an element of what is fair and what needs to be compromised on. So I think the extreme narratives on both sides never ever helped anyone. So, and this is where we need to move to a fairer society where people acknowledge there are right and wrongs, but that they are willing to come to the middle as well. And that's, I guess, one of my main takeaways when people ask me, what do you think tolerance is? Tolerance is understanding that there is commonalities across the board, no matter which side of the spectrum and sphere you're from. And I would always love to fit, like everyone has asked me, well, I would love to aim for, by the end of my term, I would love to aim for my 3 pillars, which is end homelessness, provide more sustainable living, but ultimately that we celebrate diversity. And the first step of celebration of diversity is to be inclusive and tolerant. You can be diverse across the board. There has been plenty of organizations, multinationals I worked for, where diversity was a tick box because people weren't inclusive. There is a massive difference between being diverse and being inclusive. And being inclusive means also being tolerant. And this is something we have to keep on challenging and channeling in no matter what we do. And this is why time and time again, I would be the first to challenge the rhetoric, the dog whistle politics of the far right, or any groups that will say, oh no, XY doesn't belong here, or immigrants are taking over our homes and this is why we don't have jobs. Those things need to be challenged. I did say 2 minutes ago that there is a middle ground, but the challenging means that you bring people to the middle ground. You bring those that previously were in the middle ground to a more fact-based information, fact-based narrative, because right now there's so much disinformation and discourse out there that it's hard to sift through sometimes. I tell people of an anecdote I have, which is I have a family friend who like watched me grow up, who has been the kindest person ever. But there was a couple of weeks ago, and this is maybe due to coronavirus, we were sitting there having dinner and having a chat. And he suddenly comes out with, well, you know how there's a spike in this area from COVID? That's the area that there's meat plants because there's immigrants working there. So really, if we didn't have immigrants in the country, then we wouldn't have that. And my first thing was, surely, Kieran, if we didn't have meat plants in the country, you wouldn't have that. So we need to constantly challenge what people see as information that is true to them, but really isn't. So, and that leads into a better, more tolerant society. Like when I was asked to speak about tolerance here today, all I can think of was, well, there's many things, but for me, the main things right now is to celebrate diversity, to challenge what is incorrect, and to be able to hold and stand our ground and push back a continual false narrative. And also just to hold a bit of hope. It's been a very long and trying 9-10 months for everyone. It's going to continue to be long and tough and hard. And to be fighting COVID while fighting discrimination is a huge challenge. And all I guess I want to end in saying is thank you to everyone here for taking up the fight. And thank you to everyone here for continually championing the cause and fighting for my daughter's future and everyone else's. Thank you.
A heartfelt thank you to you, Lord Mayor, for joining us. It's been our honor to have you today, and thank you so much. How long do we have you for? I
have another 15 minutes or 10 minutes, sorry. So
10 minutes, great. If anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to ask the Lord Mayor, you can please just raise your hand on the Zoom or unmute yourselves. We have the Lord Mayor here for another 10 minutes, so it's a fantastic opportunity to ask any questions you may have.
Hi, can I come in there?
Yes, please.
Hi, I'll first introduce myself. I'm Rahib from Empowering Minds Consultancy in Bradford, West Yorkshire. Thank you, Lord Mayor, for joining us here and sharing your experience and expertise in this field. Some of the comments you made are really relevant to the work that we are currently doing in Bradford. And the work that we've been doing for the last 4 years across the country, that's working in different areas. And one of the projects that I would quickly like to introduce is the Empowering Mothers Against Radicalization and Grooming. And some of that is what it looks like is intolerance and how those communities that are hard to reach communities and getting them in and working with other communities in a safe space, and so creating that safe space as a forum and discussing and asking the difficult questions that people might have. And what we found was that sometimes the narrative that is being fed is via social media, for example, Facebook, or they might be getting the information from certain newspapers that are feeding the same narrative, be it the far right or whatever, and they were just really confused on where to ask these questions. So fast forward, what the impact the program had was now we've got the same people that would agreeing with some of the stuff that Tony Robinson was saying are the same people now that are going to different faith institutions trying to learn more. They are the same people that are now sitting down and having dialogue with people from different faiths, different communities, different backgrounds. And that is done because we created this program called ENAR, and that in that we look at different aspects. So we look at communication and dialogue. We look at the influence of the media. So when Lord Mayor, you were saying that you want to create this, I don't know if you want to call it a program or strategy, and that is something that we are happy to possibly work alongside you and helping you create something like that. So I don't know if the host can share some, are we going to be able to have each of the emails at the end of this?
So what's going to happen is anybody who wants to get in touch with Lord Mayor after the event, I believe my dear colleague Adrian will share his email He's head of Dublin City Interfaith Forum, and anybody who'd like to get in touch with Lord Mayor can do so through Adrian. Everybody who is participating today as a panelist will have their emails shared. My email was on the poster, it was on the registration link. Any questions you have in terms of trying to get in touch with anyone, or if you want any documents sent to you, presentations or reports, I'm very, very happy to facilitate that. If anyone, you're very welcome. If anyone else has any direct questions to Lord Mayor, please unmute yourself now. As this is a very rare opportunity we have with the Lord Mayor, who needs to leave in about 6 minutes. So we do have a bit more time with her. Does anybody like to make any comments or questions?
Chair, so you know, I put my email up there, so feel free to email me, folks. And absolutely, Rahib, if you want to share your strategy, I'll be most welcome. And yeah, feel free to, I put it up on the chat there, my email address.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think Patrice has a question.
Yep, go for it, Patrice.
Yes, hello, Lord Mayor. Thank you for being with us. My question is simple. You've mentioned the importance of bringing people to the middle ground. Do you have examples of how you bring people with maybe intolerant and extreme views to that middle ground? Thank you.
Fantastic question.
So I was researching some of the forums around the world, and you now didn't quite work for a lot of people in the States, but during his term in office, Obama had a series called the White House Conversations, and he tasked each city as mayor to have tabletop conversations, workshops with different groups in the city, diverse groups, people from all diversities, but also people from none, and people who had issues with people from diversity. And they were very uncomfortable conversations, and they involved the police, they involved everyone, but they were also very frank conversations. And this is something that I think, one of the things I really wanted, and unfortunately COVID has put a bit of a hamper on it, but we might put it on an online way, is that original idea was to have mini, what we call citizen assemblies here in the Mansion House, where you take people from various backgrounds who, from backgrounds of diversity, but from backgrounds of on-ground community, and also people who would have been at some stage involved in the rhetoric as well, and dog whistle, and bring them in. And there have been plenty of people who have said to me, do not give them that airtime, and do not even sit at the table with them to discuss something that is fundamentally wrong. But if you don't discuss it, and if you aren't willing to have that dialogue, then you will continue to push them further and have them corral more people. So judging by how those White House conversations went, they went pretty well, but unfortunately you can see then it didn't help the trajectory of what happened with the country equally. So you will have to, for my part, from looking on some of the data from that, the way to do it is to have it in person, to have full discussion, tailored questions on what people think a multicultural society should be, what people see Ireland. So take Ireland, for example. I would have a list of top 10 issues that are ongoing at the moment, from to health, and ask people where they see Ireland as a future, but how do they see an integrated and diverse community as well in future, and have those proper conversations. And they won't be, some of the answers won't be what we like to hear, they won't, but at the same time it will offer people that space to be able to provide opinion without quashing it, but then also be able to address those issues. Because especially in COVID, what you have is that you will have certain groups and extreme groups literally hopping on people's genuine fears that they have at the moment, and being able to control that narrative and being able to control not people's thoughts, but steer them a certain direction. And our job is to make sure we steer them back into a middle ground, or where it's right. And having open dialogue is the best way to do it. So, and that's the only example I found so far, Patrice. I'm hoping there'll be others around the world. Some countries that I looked at definitely did not fare well as well. I looked at how China, Australia, and a few other countries looked at hate crime and looked at hate conversations, open dialogue, and some of them did not go well. So I'm hoping to be one of those cities that do it well. So that's the best answer I can give.
Great example. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lord Mayor. We wish you the best. We pray that you're able to accomplish these things that you want. And thank you again so much for joining us. Your contribution has been very, very valuable to us today. And thank you to Adrian for facilitating the invite to the Lord Mayor's office. Going back to our report from the OSCE, joining us from Warsaw is the head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department to introduce us to the report, Kishan Manocha. Kishan, hello again.
Hi, Ali. Hi, everyone. And must say thank you to Hazel, to the Lord Mayor, for that really very inspiring and empowering set of reflections, really to set the tone for the discussions and the conversation that will now follow. So I don't want to take up too much time, because I know there are others in the queue, so to speak and share their reflections and insights and the good practices that they are engaged in, and we need some time further for discussion among ourselves. But I wanted to just say that the report that ODIHR, my office, produced is part of its overall effort to assist the member states or participating states of the OSCE to strengthen the human dimension of security in their countries and across the region. And commitments in the area of tolerance and non-discrimination and freedom of religion or belief are integral to that work of strengthening the human dimension of security. These are commitments that the participating states, their governments, have signed up to. As Ali mentioned, this report seeks to help states learn lessons from the pandemic. Because the report came out at the end of June, it really covered the period from the onset of the pandemic, March, when it was declared a pandemic, to June. Of course, 5 full months, almost 5 months, have followed since then. So the report reviews the situation for a short period of time. It's not the whole story. Secondly, the report doesn't intend to, and it cannot, quantify, for example, the scale of the intolerance and the discrimination and the hate that sadly seems to have surged during this period. But what it seeks to do is to shine a light on where the problems are, to remind states of their commitments, to remind states that they need to, while battling the virus, ensure that fundamental rights and freedoms are still respected, and to take measures, emergency measures, in light of the exigencies of the time that are necessary and proportionate to the threat posed by the virus, to not use the pandemic as an excuse to crack down, say, further on civil society, to oppress or marginalize groups that are already disadvantaged and discriminated against, to do something, and this is relevant to the discussion today, around the rising discrimination, intolerance, and hate that we are seeing. So to implement in full a whole body of commitments and international obligations, so that not just during the period of the pandemic, but as we emerge, our societies will remain safe and secure, of course, healthy and well, but that's no good if the foundations of the broader security in society are not strengthened as well. That means a commitment to human rights, fundamental freedoms, and combating the discrimination and intolerance that has sadly accompanied the pandemic. So that's what the report seeks to do. Recommendations then, insights, learning that can help states in second and further waves, but also recommendations that can be applied to other crises, such as the ongoing climate crisis and other conflicts, human-made, I would say, rather than man-made. But the point is, most of these are man-made, sadly. But anyway, the point the report makes is that even before the virus struck, the picture across the OSCE region was not a pretty one when it comes to intolerance, discrimination, and hate. It is prevalent and has been prevalent for as long as we have been around. Our annual human rights hate crime reports document the incidents. And you can compare and contrast from year to year. These are not a full picture. It's as good as the data that we receive, but it paints a worrying picture over a number of years. That is the background. That is the backdrop. Intolerance, discrimination, hate, hostility based on identity characteristics, particularly affecting certain groups and communities in our societies across the region. So we know about anti-Semitism, we know sadly about anti-Muslim hatred, we know about general racism and xenophobia, we know about intolerance and hate towards migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, persons of African descent, people with disabilities, the LGBTQI community, women who've been targeted because they are women, and a number of other groups. But what we have reported on in this document is that during the course of the pandemic to date, as a result not only of the pre-existing inequalities and structural and systemic discrimination in many societies, and negative trends such as aggressive nationalism, tribal mentalities, and polarization in society, that alone has put at greater risk already marginalized communities, particularly Roma and Sinti communities, particularly migrants and refugees, and persons with disabilities. But on top of that, adding an extra layer to that has been the spread of rhetoric, of intolerant discourse, of hate speech, one would say, targeting certain groups, scapegoating them, dehumanizing them, denigrating them, accusing them, spreading deliberate lies, fantastical, delusional statements that they are the cause and the spread of the virus. So it's a particular form of discourse that has emerged, unique to this time. The other point is, when it comes to, say, the Jewish communities, this is not new. They're the oldest targets of conspiracy theories, disinformation, and what we would call today fake news. But there are other targets, Muslim communities, some Christian denominations, for example, and their new targets, persons of Chinese descent, of Southeast Asian heritage as well. And we've seen this, as you well know, not just offline, but it is surging online. It's become the incubator and the accelerator for huge amounts of intolerant discourse and hate speech. And the abuse and the vilification of certain groups in the OSCE region, whether offline or online, has not ended with words. We have seen violence, and we've seen attacks on properties and places of worship. What the report also tries to do is apply a gender lens to all of this, to look at the differential impact on men and women, to look at the impact on women's rights and gender equality. So in light of all this, the report makes it very clear that many states across the region have failed to live up to their legal and political obligations and commitments concerning non-discrimination. Indeed, we've seen some political leaders condemn hate crimes during the pandemic. Others, sadly, have fueled intolerance with their statements. What I would point out is that there have been a number of cases where local politicians have adopted a more inclusive approach. We've just heard a brilliant example of that from Hazel. So that has been a positive trend in this period. But I wanted to leave with one thought, and this is something which the report touches on. It doesn't open up this particular idea, but I want to share it with you now. In 1844, another mayor, the mayor of Bradford, Titus Salt, said the following: "The cholera most forcibly teaches us our mutual connection." And I think we've learned the same lesson in the era of COVID. The pandemic has indeed been a great tragedy, a tragedy for our societies. It's cruelly exposed the failings in our official systems. It's exacerbated pre-existing inequalities. It has aggravated intolerance, discrimination, and hate in our societies. But the response to the tragedy has also been, as it was in Bradford in 1844, also one of extraordinary mutual connection. And the report that ODIHR produces touches on one aspect of this, which is the role that many religious and belief actors and communities and leaders have played in this period, often in very challenging and straitened circumstances, given the restrictions that have been imposed in combating the pandemic on religious and belief life in all societies in the region. We've seen many of these actors respond to need. We've seen many of these actors among the first to reach out, offer succor and support for not just the most vulnerable in our midst, but for all, and not just their own co-religionists and co-believers, but for all in society. They have reawakened, in many cases, much needed messages of community spirit, of solidarity, of the oneness of humanity, of our common interdependence. We've also seen them, in many cases, speak out against intolerance, speak out against hate, to condemn manifestations of racism and xenophobia, to debunk conspiracy theories, and to show solidarity with victims, so thereby strengthening the fabric of our society when it has come under the most immense stress and strain. So they've not just spoken about ideals such as unity, they've demonstrated it in their dealings among each other, with civil society more broadly, and with public authorities. So this, and I'll leave you with this last reflection, this mutual connection, which of course is not only the preserve of religious belief leaders and communities and actors, points to a key resource that we can draw on as we emerge from the pandemic, to draw on the positive resources that so many faith communities have demonstrated and continue to demonstrate in our work to build societal resilience against manifestations of intolerance, discrimination, and hate, so that our societies, as they emerge from this pandemic, will be fairer, healthier, more just, more inclusive, and stronger, and fit for the purpose of the many years and decades and centuries that we have ahead. So I just want to thank CFCF one more time for this opportunity to partner today in this very fascinating and important discussion around intolerance and hate, but also the good practices that we are all working on to combat these phenomena and build inclusive and cohesive societies. Thank you.
Kishan, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone at the OSCE for partnering on this event today. That was very enlightening and gives us a lot of food for thought. Our next presentation is by the director at the Blanquerna Observatory on Media, Religion and Culture, Ramon Llull University in Catalonia, Spain. She's also a distinguished journalist in her own right, and it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Miriam Diez Bosch, whose presentation is titled Positive Initiatives During COVID-19 from Religions All Over the Globe. Miriam, how are you doing? I hope you're well.
Yes, thank you very much. I like to stress the first word, positive examples. I would like also to start by saying that we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose hope, as Martin Luther King said. So this is the introduction. I would like to present here a new platform we have created in the Blanquerna Observatory on Media, Religion and Culture, together with the KAICIID Center in Vienna. And this is a platform gathering emerging and good practices from different religious communities in the globe during COVID. because we need to know that the COVID-19 urged religions to be online. I mean, there were a lot of digital initiatives, apps, websites, social media, in which believers could practice their faith. However, with the coronavirus, for the first time, religions moved completely to the virtual platform. And even if reluctance existed in some communities regarding the possibilities of the digital sphere, they disappeared because during weeks, and still now, because the lockdown is not over, it has been the only window for communities, for parishes, to perform ceremonies, rituals, and the religion there. So before that, we had what in the academia we call the difference between religion online and online religion. And really, online religion is, how Helen says, the mature communities adapting to the new scenario. And this is what we have that. So now we have a platform, and I would share the link with you, collecting digital religion initiatives implemented by communities with mobile applications, but also with games. Because we need to understand that also, even if religion is something very serious, game could be a very interesting tool. So the platform is divided like in a marketplace with a high number of possible ideas contributing to keep the practice of religions in the lockdown, and also this freedom, guaranteeing the freedom of religion and belief, and allow initiatives to be also uploaded by persons, by members of other religions, communities all around the world. So it is a catalog open to all. I would like to share just 3 examples with you, because I know that the time is against us. We have, for instance, the idea of a escape room. This comes from the Catholic diocese here in Barcelona, where I am based now. And this is the youth ministry delegation, the catechists. They organized an online escape room for the younger ones. So the catechism group was obviously not able to meet the kids with a pastoral teacher. So they had a time to respond, to answer to questions about Jesus' life and other challenges. And then they were at the same time playing with people and groups from all over the other dioceses in Spain. So the first group who was able to escape won the game. Afterwards, they did a little debate with information they gathered. So it was something cool and playing with religion during the lockdown. Another initiative coming, for instance, from Casa Árabe in Madrid, this one is from Islam. Obviously, restrictions brought by the pandemic made it impossible to celebrate the Ramadan. You know that Spain, we were one of the first ones after China and Italy with COVID-19. So conscious of the importance of social gatherings and cultural events, Casa Árabe in Madrid, they carry out initiatives online. For instance, they included an online conference with the first emir in Al-Andalus through YouTube. They shared a story video for children about 3 friends from Cordoba in the medieval times. They also shared an online game about the Arabian Nights. So it was a nice way of sharing this. And the idea is that it's not only helpful for you as community, if it is, in this case, I am a Muslim and this is a Muslim community, and you are a Sikh and this is the Sikh community. No, the idea here is that it was also open for others to engage and to celebrate with. So I think the digital platform allowed that in a very interesting way. From Argentina, for instance, and from Jewish community, we had the Seder at Home initiative during the lockdown. Jewish believers, as we know, celebrated the Seder. And the organization Jabat Argentina, they created Jewish kits, which could be asked in the whole country in order to enjoy the celebration. So the kit included Matzah Shmura, the Haggadah, the Passover guide, and it came also like do-it-yourself, including songs, reflections, stories, and games. So without moving from home, they will receive the kit following the safety protocol, and they could play also with others. I just would like to finish with one example, an interfaith one. So the Alaya Institute organized something called Quran Inspection, bringing together premier religious voices from around the world to engage in introspection in light of the corona. So 40 interviews with major faith leaders, also spreading messages to the others, so they could also share these ideas. The platform is this one. So we have in the platform a catalog. We have Ramadan Nights Online. We have the Holy Land Challenge. We have, for instance, Submit Your Initiative. You know that you could also upload your initiative, share it with others. So we think that is a small step in a very difficult moment, but highlighting, as I started with, the positive windows that the coronavirus allowed us to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miriam. It's fantastic hearing about these projects that have been happening, and it's very positive to shine light on the contribution by the faith communities across the world. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Akilah Ahmed Mbe. She is the chair of the independent members of Cross-Government Working Group on Anti-Muslim Hatred, based here in London, and her presentation title is Coronavirus Fear and How Islamophobia Spreads on Social Media. Akilah, it's a pleasure to have you join us today.
Hi, and hi everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here speaking amongst such distinguished guests and experts on hatred and hate crime. So as Ali said, I chair the independent members of the UK Cross-Government Working Group on Anti-Muslim Hatred. I'll just spend a few moments just talking about what the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group is, and then I will spend a few moments talking about a report that we published earlier this year, looking at Islamophobia online in a time of COVID-19. So the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group was established in 2012 to consider and take forward proposals to tackle issues of anti-Muslim hate in the UK. It's a government working group, and it's made up of representatives from different UK government departments, from the Ministry of Housing and Local Communities, the Home Office, Department of Education, so on and so forth. And it's also made up of representatives from Muslim communities, independent experts and academics from around the UK who are collectively known as independent members. And it's these independent members that I chair. So the group covers a wide geographical spread across the UK, and we have representation from various traditions of Islam. We also have representation from Sikh communities, and as I mentioned, we have academic experts who are experts in hate crime and Islamophobia. And independent members are appointed by the UK government. So what do we do? So we review trends in anti-Muslim sentiment and hatred, and we propose appropriate actions to be taken by communities, government and other public bodies. So the idea is that we all come together and work in partnership to tackle anti-Muslim hatred. We also engage in interfaith work, raising awareness campaigns, and also research and monitoring of hate crime offline and online as well. And we provide some capacity building and community outreach to support grassroots initiatives that are working to address anti-Muslim hatred. We've also worked with the regulating body in the UK called IPSO, which regulates the media in the UK. And we also work with social media companies, Twitter and Facebook and others. And our work with IPSO has recently culminated in IPSO producing guidance for media in terms of how to report on Muslims and Islam in the UK. So that's kind of, our work in a nutshell. And I'll share our website address a bit later on so that you can go and have a look at our website and find out more about who we are and what we do. So fast forwarding to our report. So we have been, as everybody knows, and we can't, escape from it. We are living in this global crisis, this pandemic. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I think, there was this belief that extremists and people who sort of engage in bigotry would be more preoccupied. They'd be preoccupied with dealing with the aftermath of COVID-19 and be worrying about it. But as an expert in Islamophobia, I've been working in this field now for a number of years. I understood very quickly that it wouldn't be long before Muslims were blamed for the spread of COVID-19. So I commissioned a report by the independent members to look into Islamophobia in the context of coronavirus. And what we found is what we've already heard today on the seminar, is that Islamophobia and hatred have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Those people who are online, who wish to divide us, who want to put out narratives, have really evolved the way they talk about Muslims and express anti-Muslim hatred in the time of COVID-19. So the report titled Islamophobia and in the time of coronavirus and how Islamophobia spreads on social media was co-authored by Professor Imran Awan and Roxana Khan Williams. And they found that COVID-19 sparked online Islamophobia as racist memes and fake news, which were being shared widely across all social media platforms. So that included Twitter, Facebook, but also Telegram and WhatsApp as well. Unfortunately, some of this rhetoric went viral. Fake videos and pictures falsely showing British Muslims attending mosques and flouting social distancing rules had been shared widely on all of these platforms, in some instances thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times. And there were people like David Vance, who's now thankfully been suspended from Twitter, who were
we've lost you.
But they would focus on that and kind of, say that these are, anti-Muslim, these are Muslim and immigrant people who are queuing up, and look how they're flouting social distancing rules. In actual fact, they were just like anybody at the beginning of the pandemic who were sort of panic buying and kind of queuing up, because shops were implementing queues and things. But there was very much this kind of anti-Muslim focus and sharing of these videos and stirring up hatred against, immigrant and Muslim communities, and especially in urban areas like East London. And sometimes some of these videos, these kind of fake memes that had been shared by these kind of personalities on Twitter or Telegram, will be debunked by police. So there's one instance where a sort of a picture depicting people queuing up for a mosque for Friday prayers has been shared widely, and this mosque was supposedly in Shropshire in the UK. And the police in Shropshire actually said, look, there isn't a mosque in Shropshire. This isn't showing people queuing up now for Friday prayers. All mosques are closed in line with national restrictions. And this video or picture has been shared from before the pandemic. But by the time the police had got round to debunking this fake news, unfortunately, the damage had already been done. This had been shared, thousands and thousands of times. And also, as you might know, the kind of positive debunking news or tweets don't get shared as much as the fake news in the first instance. So as I say, unfortunately, this rhetoric had gone viral. And even though there was this debunking, it didn't stop these narratives from gaining wider traction. And we'd seen similar tactics used against other communities. Jewish people and Jewish communities were also targeted with fake news and being blamed for the spread or for the origin creating, the COVID-19 virus. And these trends were deeply concerning, and they have consequences offline in terms of hate crime, community cohesion and well-being as well. So despite the fact that there was national restrictions during the sort of initial lockdown in the UK, we did see some mosques and other people being subjected to hate crimes and being the target of hate. And some of these campaigns, and they were campaigns, hate campaigns. You know, there's still live cases, the perpetrators haven't been caught, and they are deeply worrying, especially for places of worship. So the report indicated that COVID-19 could become a trigger event, similar to the way terrorist events become trigger events for spikes in hate crime. And COVID-19 could become a trigger event for hate crime, you know, a spike in hate crime against British Muslims. And although we've not seen that as yet, you know, we are again now in a second lockdown, and this is still a very real possibility, because what we saw during the first lockdown was that anti-Muslim hatred had evolved, the anti-Muslim narratives had evolved, and they were being incubated online, and it stood kind of like the simmering pot that's, you know, still being incubated online, even though social media companies are doing a little bit more now to kind of remove some of that fake news and information. But, you know, social media companies are still a long way off from really understanding how anti-Muslim hatred is expressed online and curbing it. So unfortunately, there's still a risk that once, you know, we reach the spring, social distancing rules are relaxed, we kind of get back to normal life, some shape or form, there will be a spike in hate crimes against British Muslims, and not just British Muslims, but other faith communities, you know, and especially, you know, people who are visibly, who look religious, so whether that's Sikh communities or Jewish communities, you know, there is still this risk there. And so it's very important that social media companies do more, but it's also important that, you know, agencies, government agencies are very aware of this potential spike, and that they take preventative steps from now, and that we, you know, as governments are rightly paying attention to COVID-19 and responding to it, it's really important that we do not lose sight of this type of extremism, and we don't stop investing in preventing hate crime, because that's still very much an issue which could, you know, fall to the wayside. And one final point before I stop talking, because I am conscious of time, is that, you know, some of these narratives, these anti-Muslim narratives that have been, you know, put forward online have seeped through to mainstream public discourse. And we saw that before Ramadan and before Eid, where there was a few scaremongering stories about how Muslims taking part in Ramadan or celebrating Eid is going to cause, you know, a huge spike in COVID infections, and that's going to cause a huge burden on our you know, on our infrastructure in the UK and on our NHS. And these things simply didn't happen. They simply weren't true. But unfortunately, it shows how, you know, what we kind of think as being fringe and extreme right-wing narratives can actually then start seeping into mainstream discourse. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Akilah, thank you so much. Very good presentation, and really important subject that you've touched upon, Islamophobia. Just like the subject of anti-Semitism, which will be the area that our next two presenters will focus on. I think there's a lot of work that can be done in collaboration to identify some of the trends with Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And I'm very happy to warmly welcome Julia Mozer and Tamas Buchler from CEJI, a Jewish contribution to an inclusive Europe. Julia is the communication and policy officer, and Tamas is the program coordinator of their new initiative, NOA, N-O-A, which stands for Networks Overcoming Anti-Semitism. I believe we'll have Julia first with her presentation titled How Hate Speech Has Changed During the Pandemic. Julia, welcome.
Thank you, Ali. Thanks, everyone, and welcome. It's my pleasure to be on this panel and to talk to you briefly. I'm also conscious of the time, about what we've observed in terms of hate speech trends during the pandemic. And it will be a bit European perspective, given that CEJI is a Brussels-based NGO that works on a European level on all forms of discrimination. And in my role and my policy work, I focus on hate speech, misinformation, and online harm. So I'll be sharing more insights about that. And then I'll be followed by my colleague, as Ali pointed out, Tamas, who will talk about anti-Semitism in more detail. So how has hate speech changed during the pandemic, or should I ask, has hate speech changed during the pandemic? I would like to share with you today some of the trends that we saw during the first wave between March and May with the SCAN partnership. There was a European project that ran until end of May, covering 9 European countries, including Belgium, Germany, France, Slovenia, Czech Republic, Croatia, and Italy. So quite a wide geographical scope. And then talk a bit about how misinformation has been playing a more than usual active role in the spread of hate speech, as well as touching upon a bit on how social media reacted to it. And we'll conclude my 8 minutes with a few practical tips and question what we can do, what each of us can do to counter the wave of hate. So before I get into the trends that we observed, I just want to make sure that we have a shared understanding of what hate speech is. So just really quickly recalling some of the facts, including that there's still no one universal definition for hate speech. And how we approach the topic with CEJI and with the Facing Facts project, we see hate speech and all the different definitions on a spectrum, basically, where on one hand you have stricter definitions, that is more legal definitions. The one that we rely on is the European Commission's that is based on the 2008 framework decision on xenophobia that defines hate speech to be public incitement to hatred or to violence. But you also have a lot of definitions on the sort of other side of the spectrum that tend to be broader, to be more victim focused and sometimes more subjective, but capture better the harm that the illegal part might not capture that well. So what we have seen in terms of hate speech during the first wave, and here I want to echo what Akeela was saying about the hope that there would be less hate because people were busy with their health and other worries. And we're just about to start another research project when the lockdown hit in March. So we had this 1 week where we're also sort of disoriented and looking for, we were supposed to check what is happening, how hate speech is functioning in an ordinary context. And we all remember March was nothing was ordinary in March. So, and if there was a slight pause in how hate functions online, it was quickly overcome and there was a deluge of hate speech. So what we noticed, what some of the key elements of how hate speech was evolving throughout this time was that there was an intensification. So quickly after this short pause, there was suddenly hate flooding our online spaces. We saw the usual scapegoat mechanism in place, blaming minorities and different minorities as the cause of the pandemic and everything that's been happening. Conspiracies also strongly supporting and feeding into it. And there were also old stereotypes appearing, but also new stereotypes or new types of hatred. And I primarily mean anti-Asian or anti-Chinese hatred. That is something that's been under the radar for, I believe, for European NGOs. It was not something that, for example, was part of the European Code of Conduct on illegal hate speech and the monitoring exercises there. So it was a completely new phenomenon that we saw everywhere. And the worrying aspect was that it wasn't just confined to the online spaces. So it wasn't just online hate speech. It was also offline hate speech and also translated into hate crimes and physical attacks from France to Croatia, all the way to the UK. We also saw that misinformation, both health-related misinformation, I think health-related misinformation got more attention in those months, obviously, for obvious reasons, but also I think the link between hate speech and misinformation during that time in those months became more prevalent than ever before. And we saw it from cases as, for example, a blogger in Latvia who shared a false video and then called for the liquidation of Chinese people. And by false video, I just want to remind all of us that it's not necessarily always the content that is false, but also as the example that Akeela brought up, it can be false timing. So it's an old video, it can be a false context. There is a whole classification of how misinformation can appear. And we saw the whole variety, the entire spectrum during this time. So we also saw the pandemic being perceived as a tool for domination, whether it was by Jewish people or Chinese people, or Jewish and Chinese people working together for world domination. We also saw the old stereotype from the Middle Ages, Jews, when Jews were blamed for poisoning wells, now they were blamed for the eruption of the pandemic and profiteering from it. But there were also new forms of anti-Semitism. I won't go into too much detail, I'll leave that to my colleague Tamas, but another form was the so-called holocough. You know, if you're infected with the virus, go and cough on a Jewish person and make sure they will get it too. So we saw the whole variety of hatred, and it really in a way that it was more intense and escalated more than before, as our partners and we perceived during this research period. Now, how has social media reacted to all this as being a key player in how we regulate or moderate our online spaces? So first of all, there was a lockdown everywhere, which I feel now that we can all resonate to. I assume I'm not the only one speaking from lockdown. So their moderators were also not available for the work, which led to a lot of hate content staying online, and a lot of content mistakenly removed because of an increased reliance on technological solutions and machine learning. At the same time, when it came to health-related misinformation, they were quick to react, and quite good mechanisms were put in place so that people are not sharing false information and that they can get connected right away to credible sources on health information. So I think one of the big lessons from the first wave of the pandemic was, especially in this aspect, is that the technology to curb online harms is available and is applicable. It just needs to be applied wisely. And I believe the wisely part is something that will be part of the upcoming Digital Services Act. So to answer my first question, has hate speech changed during the pandemic? The question is yes and no. Yes, because it made misinformation and the role of misinformation in spreading hatred more visible. And it also made more visible other and new types of hatred that we might have not been that aware of before. But it hasn't really changed hate speech, because we saw old stereotypes coming back, the old patterns really emerging. And we also saw that removal in itself as the only tool is not solving the entire situation. So it's not removal, and it's not social media companies, not saying that we each have to do solve this by our own, but what can each of us do to contribute with our part to fight hate and promote positive action? And how can we help our communities to do so and to take active part in that? And I believe, and I'm very happy to be working for an organization where it's the same belief, that education is the key in that. Educating ourselves, educating our loved ones and the ones in our communities is essential. That is what helps us to a recognition of the problem, and then to be able to have the skills and the tools to actually react, whether we see hate speech or hate crimes. So one of the projects that we've been working on since 2011 is the Facing Facts project. And I'm very happy to say that since 2016, we have our online courses on Facing Facts online available on the topic of hate speech and hate crimes. And these courses are specifically designed to help the recognition of hate incidents, the monitoring of hate incidents, and the countering of hate incidents. Of course, we don't always have all the energy and not necessarily all the knowledge to know what to say to certain hate speech that we see online. And it's sometimes not, we don't need to counter every piece, but what we can do is always to be an ally and express our solidarity towards the people or the person or the group that is targeted. And this way signaling that we're there for the person who's targeted, and also signaling to others that hate speech is not okay. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope maybe the Facing Facts online courses will also be useful for you. And now I'll let my colleague Tamas take over and talk about another exciting project that we've been working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. If I can just jump in before Tamas starts his presentation. I'm very conscious of time, so I'd just like to ask all the participants, in order for us to have a successful Q&A session at the end, can you write your questions down if you have any from now, so I can read them from the chat when it's time for the Q&A, because we've only got about 20 minutes left and we have 2 more great presentations. So without further ado, Tamas, I believe you'll be talking to us about how NOAA is offering a pioneering approach to tackle the problem of rising anti-Semitism in Europe under the current circumstances. Take it away, NOAA. Tamas, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Ali. Thank you, everyone. It's a great honor to be on this panel. And indeed, I'm trying to bring here a positive message. I think we all badly need positive input these days. So as for the project, NOAA means in motion or motion in Hebrew. And for us at CEJI, it means a positive movement towards a society where Jewish life will flourish and anti-Semitism will be curtailed and reduced. I think we can all agree that European Jews, such as, and also other minorities, experienced the rising tide of hatred in the last year, and some Jewish organizations teamed up last February to create a positive and systemic impact. So just really to wrap up with what that experience looked like in the last couple of months, and Julia and also Kishan mentioned a couple of points. I think many of us experienced all kinds of manifestations of anti-Semitism. I think one of the most common one that I personally also experienced was the so-called Zoom bombing, when trolls are invading Jewish spaces, even spiritual spaces, obviously I mean virtual spaces, such as synagogue services or life cycle events. We also witnessed an explosion of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on social media. I think Julia mentioned a couple of those conspiracy theories that were very, very common these days. I'm going to say a couple of words about that. I don't want to elaborate too much on that because it was already briefly mentioned, but I just want to mention that it's not a new phenomena, and dating back to the medieval times and the Black Death, the plague in the 14th century that killed 1/3 of the population of Europe, it's been a reoccurring motive among anti-Semites to blame the Jews for causing illnesses, diseases, and it always resulted on Jews being tortured, executed, and expelled from European countries. It all led up to the Mein Kampf and Adolf Hitler, who said that the Jews are like a virus that were threatening Germany. And the Nazi propaganda regularly compared Jews to disease-bearing creatures. So some of its legacy that we see now on social media of Hitler and the Nazi propaganda is that it's many different examples of claims that the virus is fake, that it's only a Jewish conspiracy, and the Jews are plotting to mislead the public. The other version of it is to say that the virus is real, but it is a Jewish conspiracy in order to create all kinds of evil situations, such as the Third World War, or they have some sort of financial interest in spreading the virus and then developing a vaccine that they could sell to non-Jews. You also hear a lot about the Jews being primary spreaders of the virus. It's even on my social media feed. I see it happening very often. For centuries, the anti-Semitic propaganda were depicting Jews as somehow dirty, and some of the stories in the media about relatively high numbers of Jews dying really feeds into that narrative that Jews are the primary spreaders of the virus. Also, we saw a lot of social media posts celebrating Jewish death and the high toll of Jews dying. And last but not least, the one that Julia was mentioning is that we saw calls to spread the disease to Jews and to go to Jewish spaces, those people who already were infected with COVID, and to infect as many Jews as possible. And as much as I think our instinctive reaction would be to dismiss these theories because of their absurdity, the harsh reality is that linking Jews to the virus in the neo-Nazi propaganda might carry deadly consequences, just as we have always seen that. So just to say something more positive, I really want to speak a little bit about CEJI's intervention with our partner organizations. What is the kind of change we want to create? So first of all, NOAH, Networks Overcoming Anti-Semitism, is researching and compiling so-called national report cards for EU member states. These report cards will be tools to hold governments accountable and engage them in developing and implementing national action plans to address and prevent anti-Semitism, as it was called in the EU Council Declaration on the Fight Against Anti-Semitism in 2018. The report cards will also assess and evaluate state policies across 10 different areas with hundreds of indicator questions based on international standards that are team collected. These areas will include education, culture, security, media, hate crime and hate speech, sports, Holocaust remembrance, interreligious dialogue, and religious freedoms. These report cards will be presented to the public in a couple of months. So I think that I will post here later on the website where we're actually going to present them, and you can stay tuned and see what we came up with. The second intervention of NOAA is to create an online tool called the NOAA Compass to create an interactive map for 1,000 European initiatives overcoming anti-Semitism that seeks to identify existing projects, bring them into a network, and see where are the gaps. And it will be a resource for public authorities and civil society organizations that are looking for best practices. Our third intervention is creating new training for educators. Our new and improved Overcoming Anti-Semitism manual aims to address the challenges educators are facing today with downloadable teaching tools that will effectively counter anti-Semitic prejudice. We hope to train tens of people across Europe who will deliver workshops for another thousands of people across Europe as a multiplier effect. We also have a social media campaign that we already started a couple of months ago. It's called Profiles, and it focuses on recent positive Jewish contributions to a democratic and inclusive Europe. We are highlighting the stories of Jewish activists, role models, and initiatives fighting for human rights, combating poverty and racism, or just simply creating change by bringing together different religious leaders in order to counter stereotypes and reinforce a positive narrative about European Jewry. We also run cultural projects as part of the NOAA project, including the European Days of Jewish Culture in 2021, which will engage thousands of people across Europe with positive narratives on Jewish history and the history of different Jewish communities. We are working together with a network of 400 Jewish cultural institutions across Europe that will organize exhibitions and concerts, screenings, lectures in the theme of multicultural dialogue. Moreover, NOAA is holding pluralism seminars in different cities across Europe, which will reach professionals working in the field of Jewish cultural heritage to help them to create new educational tools. Also, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but we are also involved with the European Roots of Jewish Heritage, which is a project about cultural tourism and sustainable cultural development. Last but not least, NOAA is going to work with sport clubs to have them committed to ensure that they are creating inclusive and respectful environments where any expression of anti-Semitism or hatred won't be tolerated. And through our workshops, we will develop step-by-step guides for tackling anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred in sports. We will do it in consultation with local and national Jewish communities, Jewish community organizations, professionals, academics, different anti-discrimination organizations, and our transferable training module will be implemented within the framework of seminars designed to combat anti-Semitism among the European sporting community. So this was really NOAA in a nutshell. I know that we are behind schedule, but I do want to say that in case you want to get involved, you are interested in the mentioned training opportunities and cultural events, or in the national report cards that are very much focusing on research and policy recommendations, or you just want to get involved with our social media campaigns by either nominating a project or submitting a project to our campaign, you are more than welcome to do so. I think NOAA has a very strong grassroots profile in terms of how we operate and how we build up the project with local activists and local thinkers. So before I finish, I really like to encourage you to get involved, to stay in touch. I'm going to post in the chat box our website and my email, and I hope to work with you in the future. So that was really NOAA in a nutshell, and thank you, and Ali, the word is back to you.
Tamas, thank you so much. Good luck with this initiative, and I'm sure many of our participants here today would love more information on how to get involved. We are running short on time, and we have our final presentation. Last but 100% not least, our final presentation of the day is Professor Patrice Brodeur from the University of Montreal. And I think it might be quite early for him, as I think he's joined us today from Canada, which we appreciate so much. Patrice is also a senior advisor to KAICIID, and I believe when he's not in Canada, he's very much engaged here in Europe. His presentation title is Key Recommendations from the G20 Interfaith Forum to Combat Intolerance and Hate in the Age of the Coronavirus. And it's my absolute privilege to introduce you here today, Patrice, and thanks so much for joining us. I hope it's not too early for you.
No, it's not too early. Thank you very much, Ali. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Alaikum, and Namaste. Hello to everybody that are still online. Thank you for being here. I just want to share my thanks first to OSCE and CFCF for organizing this important seminar, and to all of the previous speakers from whom I'm learning a huge amount, and I'm sure everybody are online. Let me begin briefly, and I will shorten my presentation. I want to share my screen first with all of you by actually looking and focusing today on, and do you see now a call to action online? Is that seen to everybody? Yes, okay, good. So my presentation is focused on something that just came out 2 days ago. Is this call to action that comes from a G20 Interfaith Forum that took place a month ago. It was, of course, online, and it was the result itself of several consultations in different parts of the world. I'll explain in a minute. But this, of course, is a call to action to G20 leaders who are meeting online in 2 days on the 21st and 22nd of this month. And it was supposed to be hosted, and the whole thing online is still hosted by Riyadh in the capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And prior to this large event, which of course is one of the highest and most important space for economically powerful countries in the world, it's basically there are 8 engagement groups that feed into the process, and a new, hopefully soon to be recognized engagement group is this global G20 Interfaith Forum group. And so part of the results are here, this document, and I sent you the link already on chat if you want to open it online as I speak, so that you can roam around the document, which is 142 pages, so it's a long document. But the initial parts are very short with very crisp sort of recommendations, hopefully getting to the Sherpa not only of Saudi Arabia, which is what happened 2 days ago, but also to the Sherpa of the other 19 members of the G20. Let me begin by saying, of course, that at this time of worldwide pandemic, there is obviously an increase in the use of social media, and it is in part to compensate for the need to connect with other people because of the reduction in that we have on our movement as human beings in so many different parts of the world. This, of course, has led to an increase in hate speech online, which requires, of course, urgent action. And part of this is reflected in this call to action. So let me just say that this is an initiative, this global interfaith forum is an initiative from 4 organizations: the G20 Interfaith Forum, which is itself a network of networks that has been in place since 2014. It is also with the help of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, with the KAICIID International Dialogue Center, which I am part of, and also the National Council for Interfaith Relations and Dialogue in Saudi Arabia. And so, as you can see, there is this consortium coming to try to sort of pull together a variety of different people. And the variety is very striking because it's not only people from religious communities in this global interfaith forum. And so if you look at the lower right-hand side, you have here the statistics of who was actually in that event a month ago, which was a 5-day online event, which brought in over 2,000 people, and several of them, of course, of 147 speakers are represented here by this particular sort of pie chart. And you can see that religious leaders and people representing religious organizations or faith-based organizations were only a small segment, actually, of the overall diversity of people. So that indicates already a wonderful development in the cooperation between a variety of sectors of societies and policymakers in particular, and a variety of religious actors and leaders. So in this particular process, it was preceded, before that 5-day online event last month, it was preceded over the previous 5 months by these different consultations that you see online. I participated in a few of them, but I want to simply say that the European one had as one of its focus notions of technological advancement to counter hate speech and also protect sacred sites. And so already, you know, there are people who've been thinking a lot about sort of how to come up with some concrete recommendations for G20 leaders. Now, if we focus now, there were 5 areas of these recommendations that came out of last month's event. Of course, some of them addressing the COVID-19, then others advancing peace and resolving conflicts. And the third one in particular in this case is the one that I will focus on in a few minutes, because it is directly related to notions of hate speech and intolerance. And then, of course, there was empowering people through development agendas that promote education. And education, of course, includes, and I'll mention 1 or 2 key points there, notions that relate to our theme today. And finally, there was also taking common action to protect the planet. And the last one was actually about enhancing and elaborating religion public sector synergies. And that's a whole new area that actually in some countries has existed for a long time. In other secular countries is just barely beginning to happen. And in some ways, CFCF represents, I think, at a municipal level of governance, that kind of development, which is so wonderful to see. So now, if I look at that second of the element, advancing peace and resolving conflict, a huge amount of what was developed for recommendations to these G20 leaders was about sort of countering hate speech and what is the role of religion and of culture. But more specifically, I'm going to focus here on those 5 elements, which are actually elements which are important to mention because they're about the responsibilities that religious communities have themselves in stepping out in the public area in order to talk about preventing hate speech of different kinds. Whether it's about their own religious traditions being misinterpreted and stereotyped and discriminated against, or whether it has to do with their own believers at times participating themselves in the production of hate speech for some reasons that are, of course, unacceptable. And so here you see sort of 5 specific areas. First, you know, the importance of advocating for rules and legislation that prevent discrimination. And this, of course, is complicated, as we will see later, because the legislation and definitions are not yet set. And even when there's legislation, it often focuses on where hate speech becomes actually propagated, and that's when the laws often are able to provide sort of an immediate way of intervening. But hate speech itself sometimes simply exists because somehow, in the name of supposedly freedom of expression, some countries tolerate it because they don't want to interfere and break down too much sort of the areas are understood as freedom of expression. And it is a very, very, very difficult and tense areas in terms of debates on these issues. The second area, of course, is advocacy for policies that provide redress and support for those who have been affected by hate speech. A third one has to do with partnerships with governments in identifying hate speech, especially where it may lead to incitement to violence. That's where, of course, the development of legislation is particularly useful. But of course, it needs to be more than that. And so, I'm just moving the screen so you can see. The fourth one has to do with promoting values such as tolerance, non-discrimination, pluralism, and freedom of expression and opinion. And here, of course, is the balance between Article 18 and Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're not in competition with each other. They are complementary with each other. But sadly, some people sort of put more emphasis on one and somehow decrease the second and vice versa. And that's not to the help and of countering hate speech and intolerance at all. Finally, the fifth one has to do with strengthening interfaith, intercultural, and intra-religious dialogue, because often there are tensions within each of our religious communities as to how to address those issues of intolerance, focused on nuance and deeper understanding of other faiths and religions or other understandings within one's faith tradition as a way to prevent the development and unfortunately increase in hate speech and intolerance. So these are some examples of the recommendations that are coming out. Just a second. Then there is, of course, when it comes to empowering people through development agendas that promote education. If I focus specifically on education, I wanted to read a passage because it really helps you understand sort of hopefully the way in which this is being approached by a global network of experts in education, in particular in this case, that are both rooted in faith communities as well as beyond that, but are sensitive to making sure that religious and faith perspectives are included in education, as well as, of course, other worldviews that are not religious per se. And so I'm going to read just one passage here because the stress of what was coming out of this particular consultation on education was that we need to promote inclusive education as widely as possible as an ideal because it's central to proven social goals for educational systems. It offers paths to enhancing students' motivation for participation and learning, raise self and other awareness, of course, and reduces bias and stereotypes, enriching friendships with peers and relationship with others, increasing capacities in teamwork, collaboration, and conflict transformation. Finally, enabling a greater sense of belonging and community, which is so essential because part of the reasons for part of the factors that lead to intolerance is the feeling of not being connected, being discriminated against, or feeling that way, and therefore looking for scapegoats in explanations that are often linked to ignorance or misunderstandings that lead to prejudice, discrimination, and therefore hate speech and hate crimes. And so education is obviously key to this whole process, but education today is not just the traditional educational systems in place for those who have access to it, but it's also non-formal education and a variety of ways in which education needs to take place in the workplace for people who have been out of the educational systems in a traditional sense for years often. They need to be reached out as well, and especially when we are dealing with social media today, all kinds of initiatives, and many of them have already been mentioned by the previous speakers, and that's wonderful to see being developed. So I don't have time to go further into that direction, but I just wanted to say that that there's also in this document a whole section that is a policy brief, much more in detail on questions of hate speech and the role of religion and culture in addressing those in particular, because of course hate speech is just a global phenomenon that has been fueled in so many different ways by what I call often the Wild West of the social media, where fortunately in the last year or two there's been new agreements with Facebook and Twitter and several other organizations or platforms in order to begin to actually invest more money in hiring people to actually delete spots and messages that are full of hate and that are fake news and so on and so forth. And so this is beginning to happen. I was just reading this morning a BBC report that says that Facebook had deleted lots of posts that were the racist posts against Kamala Harris, for example, and that is, of course, welcome. But there needs to be more regulation in that area of social media. And the whole document here, about 10 pages out of the 142 pages of this call to action, are focusing specifically on hate speech and wanting to do that. So if one goes through that, there's there's a section on the left here about triggers and forms around definitions, because it is a little complex. And then there is an international concept, a context within which this is all taking place. You can read as well as me all of that. But I think what's important at the end is to look at towards the end here, because I'm again cutting my presentation. I just want to say that there are wonderful recommendations that are coming out. There's the context in education here, which is key, but also media. How do we put limits and put pressure on both traditional and social media when it comes to deontological sort of ways at which they need to self-monitor themselves as well as to what's acceptable and what's not. And finally, there's a set of recommendations here, but because it's already past the time, I will skip this for a matter of time and let you read them later on when you have a chance. So I'm going to stop here, and thanks again to everybody.
Thank you so much, Patrice. I know we're running a bit late, but what a way to end the presentations. So much to discuss in such little time. If it's okay, for just the next 2 minutes, there's just two questions that if some of the panelists want to stay on, that people want me to answer as a matter of urgency. They'd like to hear it live. The first one's from Ian Stewart in Scotland, another CFCF member and dear friend, who asks, is there a rise in hate from nationalism being imported from different countries to countries in Europe? And there's one about young people using social media to get their information. So because social media is now being used for hate speech, is there anything we can do in educating young people when using social media? So I don't know who'd like to answer the first question. Patrice, perhaps? Or Julia, I don't know. Yeah, Julia, sure, go for it.
Well, just to begin, of course, you know, ethno-nationalism has been a challenge for decades in some ways. When nationalism discourse actually gets expressed in the form of ethno-nationalism, based on the often majority ethnic group in the country, if that is not balanced with tolerance and openness to diverse other ethnicities and religions often and so on and so forth, then of course we're leading ourselves into a dangerous sort of a way of understanding nationalism in a ways which is only supposedly for the benefit of the majority, if it is even the majority, depending on the diversity composition of each country. But ethno-nationalism versus citizenship nationalism, which puts an emphasis more on equal rights to every citizen within a country, is one of those debates between more right-wing and more left-wing understandings of nationalist discourses today. Thank you.
Great. Julia, do you have a follow-up with that, or?
I wanted to tackle the second question on young
please
people.
do.
Yeah, so this is also the reason why, I mean, I think everyone is aware of this is happening. People are increasingly moving online and young people are exposed to a lot of hatred, but also a lot of false information. I was just reviewing the OSCE adult survey skill last week, and it has some promising news, not necessarily on hate speech itself, but I mean, how we consume information online is connected to literacy and digital literacy, how we are able to evaluate the sources, different informations, protect ourselves online. And young people across the OECD countries did 7 times better than the other generations, like the general population compared to them. So there is hope, and it actually, when it comes to misinformation, it's often shared by older generations. So there are some generational myths around how misinformation spreads, and there's definitely hope for young people, but I'm a strong believer of digital literacy and digital literacy education from very young age, from the youngest age possible, because I feel like this is a shield that everyone needs in today's society.
Thank you so much, Julia. And now for the closing statement from Senior CFCF Coordinator, my partner in crime. Actually, she's the heartbeat of the CFCF. She does most of the work, Miss Leonie Lewis, to close the show, and thank you from me.
Okay, thank you all very much. And I'm sorry we did run over. I always like to try and keep to time. So this will be very short, but I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the information that's been shared, and what's particularly important and what's relevant to us involved in CFCF, the Cities of Faith and Community Forum, is that our importance is shared through actual practitioner action. And I think what you summed up there with Professor Patrice was some action points which really helped, I think help us all think through where we are and what we've been doing. And I think that's quite unique to the USP of the CFCF. So I want to thank everybody, all the presenters, particularly for their excellent presentations. And again, their focus on practical responses. And I know that they've all given their details. So if you do want to get in touch, we all sent out the emails for everybody of our panelists, and I know that we've got a lot more work to do, so that's also very good to leave them wanting more. I also want to thank you all for sharing some positive solutions and thoughts, because the topic itself is heavy and it's quite challenging, and it can leave us a little bit dimmed and a little bit gloomy. So I think it's very important that we left on a more of a high note, where we can think that there are things that we can do which we can change, and it's up to us as individuals, as someone says before, of course our organizations and as faith actors, we can do something, we can be influencers, but we can ourselves look into ourselves. I particularly want to thank our primary partner today, that's Dr. Kishan Manocha. I know he's had to go. Kishan was a very involved member of the Faith Forum for London, which I'm a trustee, and I'm grateful to him and the OSCE for their engagement in this program. I want to thank Jeeves, and who's done all our tech work for this session today, because without it we wouldn't be able to really hear what was going on, see what was going on. I know we have recorded it, and that information, together with some of the information that you have put up on, you've posted, will go out to everybody. Probably if Ali and I get our act together within the next 2 to 3 weeks maximum, everyone will receive something. So people keep posting things if you've got information that you'd like to share. Also, you can we will send out a reminder to everyone about our CFCF .Europe website, because then you can have a look and it's live and you can put information on that. Finally, I also wanted to particularly thank Ali, who's rather self-effacing, but he's really put this all together. I was just happened to know a few people and got a few people to participate in the program, but Ali's really helped us put it all together. And to thank our team of Adrian and Ian and our other representatives and Rabbi Alex, who've been involved in putting the program on. Just to let you a bit of good news, I just chatted to Professor Miriam, who's one of our great colleagues on board, and we do hope that probably end of January, very early February, we will bring another webinar, this time hosted, we hope, in Barcelona, the Blanquerna Institute, where we will hopefully feature the Mayor of Barcelona, and together we will be looking, and she's particularly focusing on, we hope we'll be focusing on cohesion, integration of immigrant groups, and how that affects our society. So that's very much where we're coming from. Again, I hope everybody stays safe and stays well. If you are celebrating Diwali, I hope you have a wonderful Diwali. If you're going to be celebrating the Festival of Hanukkah, the Jewish Festival of Lights, Hanukkah Sameach. And for those of you who will be celebrating Christmas very shortly, I do hope you all get to see your loved ones and enjoy it. And thank you all very much for joining us. We will be in touch with everybody, and goodbye, and thank you for it, apologizing for it going on a little bit over. But thank you all very much. Thanks for all my colleagues too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Leonie.
Thank you, Leonie, Ali.
Thank you.
God bless
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Leonie. Take care.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Leonie. Thanks, Ali. Really good.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Hi, David. Bye-bye.
Lovely to see you, Professor Patrice.
Yeah, it's great seeing you, Jeff. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
La Brioute. In this time, right?
Right. That's all we can hope for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So keep up the great work. Bye, Jeff.
Bye. Bye, Jeeves. Thank you.
Bye, Ali.
Bye, Carolyn.
Many
Thank you,
thanks.
Jeeves.
Bye.